Right, well, hello again, and welcome back to LogiSYM Vietnam 2020. The title of this next session is Logistics in Vietnam, Trends and Opportunities. So we do tend to hear a lot of good things about Vietnam. I believe it's the only major economy in Southeast Asia set to see positive GDP growth in this rather terrible year of 2020. It has a relatively young, well-educated and tech-savvy population. I believe 70% is under the age of 35, quite different to here in Singapore. And it has seen increasing levels of foreign investment, FDI, over the last decade. In terms of logistics, things seem to be improving as well. In the World Bank LPI index, the Logistics Performance Index, it was in 64th position in 2016 and now went up to 39th in the last index in 2 years ago in 2018. But to help us understand more about the logistics landscape in Vietnam, especially from an infrastructure perspective, I'm really delighted to welcome from Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, Mr. Stephen Higgins, who is the Director, Capital Markets at Jones Lang LaSalle, JLL, in Vietnam. And Stephen has worked in commercial real estate investment for more than 10 years, right across the Asia-Pacific region. So we're going to have Stephen's presentation, and after that we'll have a Q&A. So I do welcome you to submit your questions on this topic. And with that, Stephen, please proceed with your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bob. Yeah, so we'll be presenting a presentation today which is on industrial and obviously covering all aspects of industrial in Vietnam, specifically to some of the key areas that we're focused on, which is logistics, warehousing, the factors that affect that, and also infrastructure and key movements in that aspect as well. As a bit of a text to commence, with the FDI in Vietnam, we're obviously seeing strong growth with capital coming into the country. As you can see, a lot of that is focused on manufacturing, where about 51% of that is to manufacturing, and that obviously has a big impact on the industrial and logistics market. Obviously, with real estate activities, which is obviously JLL's core business, that's around 7%. But really, manufacturing and infrastructure are the key there on the FDI. When looking at the industrial landscape in Vietnam, we went into three key zones throughout the country, and the main zones are really North and South Vietnam. And we refer to these areas, when we're looking for, say, South Vietnam, we refer to it as Greater Ho Chi Minh City, ultimately, which is Ho Chi Minh City and the immediate surrounding provinces, which are Dong Nai, Binh Nhung, Long An, and Vung Tau as well. When we're looking at North Vietnam, it's similar to Hanoi and the surrounding provinces, which is obviously Bac Ninh, Vien Phuc, and the key one in the east is Hai Phong, which is probably the third largest industrial market in the country. Obviously, when we look at some of these statistics here, there's obviously so South Vietnam's considerably bigger, and the key things to understand there are really the 25,000 hectares of leasable area. Binh Nhung province, which is north of Ho Chi Minh, was really the pioneering location for industrial in Vietnam. And that's where a lot of the foreign manufacturers and local manufacturers set up, they established their operations. So really, and in the north, it's considerably less. It's about 9,400 hectares. So when we look at that, it's the existing warehouse space in South Vietnam is around 2.3 million square meters. North Vietnam, it's only about 700,000 square meters, so considerably less. So in the total Vietnam, there's there's 3 million square meters of warehousing, and that's, of that 3 million, we would say that there's probably 30% of that is modern grade, and then there's probably another 500,000 under construction right now. And we would say that the total occupancy of that is around that 95% mark, and probably 65% of the tenants are logistics tenants, which are third-party logistics companies or FMCG or other related warehouse occupier users. The remaining 35% we would say is a combination of e-commerce and other specific occupiers. With the ready-built factory as well, that's one of the key terms we use in Vietnam. Given that there's a lot of large manufacturers in Vietnam, the biggest are Samsung, LG, and groups of that scale. They bring a lot of vendors and supply chain with them that requires ready-built factory. So that's obviously a big component of the real estate market as well. Just sort of to paint a bit of a picture around the strategic location, obviously Vietnam, one of the biggest, this is a bit of a port, sort of shows some various port routes around North Asia. China, obviously, one of the biggest export partners for Vietnam, has some key routes there, and also Southeast Asia towards Singapore as well. I think Vietnam is quite progressive from a government involvement perspective. All logistics, warehouse, and industrial use real estate is located within industrial zones, which are very well organised from a town planning perspective from the government, but also from a regulation perspective and having progressive exemptions and tax incentives, and really getting local governments involved in that whole sort of program. Obviously, we have a lot of big occupiers that deal directly with the central government of Vietnam, but there's a lot of government has in an organised manner has set up a lot of SOEs that have made this FDI process smoother. Vietnam has been very proactive with the free trade agreements, and we've listed out a number of them here, and that's obviously and the country's getting more and more progressive, particularly with the US and Europe, to get that trade to faster. When looking at infrastructure in the country, this is obviously very, very important for all aspects of the economy, and also logistics as well, given it affects that travel times and toll costs and other factors. We are seeing infrastructure move faster in the country, which is obviously in the form of roads, and we're seeing new railway construction in the south. And obviously with industrial park development, formation of new clusters, which means that the government has been very progressive with, allocating land zoned correctly for logistic clusters, to make it a more fluid process for occupiers to find these places. When looking at Vietnam, I guess this is from a competitive advantage standpoint. It is still quite affordable. That's why a lot of occupiers have come here from China. Obviously, Vietnam is considerably smaller than China, but some of the key advantages are the access to labour. Bob mentioned, there's obviously a big population here of 95 million, a very young working age population, and still a rapid urbanisation trend that will come over the next 5 to 10 years with the rising middle class. So there really is a very strong supply of human resources there. We are seeing on the real estate side, we are seeing strong land price growth, but obviously the government is proactive, with new industrial zones and infrastructure to open up new provinces as well. Just to give a bit of a perspective on obviously the US being one of the biggest consumers in the world, and just showing from perspective of how Vietnam is growing, being a big partner to the US. which year on year is increasing. Just to give an idea, especially in the last year, 9 months with the COVID, there have been a number of large occupiers which are up that really higher on that manufacturing sphere of technicality. There has been a number of groups made announcements this year. Obviously, Foxconn being one, TTI being another, and obviously Samsung expansion as well. I think really some of the impacts like COVID have accelerated some of these decisions. But I think the trend that Vietnam is on, it really is a natural evolution for these quality and scale of occupiers to come here. On this slide, we just have a bit of a trajectory where the country is, Vietnam, at the moment. So it still is on the lower end of the specialisation for manufacturing, but we are seeing growth into more technical products being made here. Just have a bit of an outlook here from Vietnam perspective. So we obviously see the evolving logistics sector, the economy is growing, and obviously movement from China. Jumping into the warehouse, we have some more detailed information on the warehouse. So to understand the context of Vietnam and the country, as I mentioned earlier, there's about 4 million square metres of warehousing. If we look at the graphic on the right here, there is 3 million in the south. And I mentioned, Binh Duong is the main province that really sort of pioneered a lot of these manufacturing sectors and aspects. Dong Nai soon to follow. In the north, it's really been Bac Ninh, Hai Phong, which have been some of the key areas, especially Bac Ninh. I think everyone's heard of a lot of Samsung factories in Vietnam where they've spent more than $20 billion on manufacturing facilities to build technical products. A lot of those are in Bac Ninh province, and there's a few R&D facilities in Ho Chi Minh as well. We just have a bit of a comment here on rents. Obviously, from a investment perspective for foreign funds coming into Vietnam, obviously what rents they can obtain from tenants is very critical. We're obviously seeing quite good rent growth as the occupier footprint is increasing, and when we have seen a lot of funds raise capital in the last 2 to 3 years to sort of to build these assets to rent to third parties. Just a bit of some specifications there. But I think this is quite an important slide, just to sort of give paint a bit of a picture around where a lot of the third-party logistics companies and occupiers are for logistics in South Vietnam. So as you can see, there's a lot of the clusters that exist at the moment are in North Binh Duong, in Binh Duong, which is north of Ho Chi Minh City, and also within Ho Chi Minh City as well. And now we're sort of starting to see some movement southeast to Dong Nai, and also southwest and south to Long An province. But obviously, you can see some of the key players there. Obviously, with DB Schenker, DHL, and the 3PLs of that nature, which obviously have a strong global footprint. So here we just sort of identifying the clusters and where the movements will be. As mentioned, this is just sort of showing, I guess, from an infrastructure perspective, there is a movement from Binh Duong in the south. Oh, sorry. There is this particular slide here is in the north, which obviously when we look in Hanoi City, there are some earlier industrial parks in the city. We see Gemodat Logistics there, but some of the key areas are obviously Bac Ninh and Hai Phong, where a lot of the foreign groups are that make up the 800 to 1 million square metres of warehousing that exists in Greater Hanoi. We obviously see there has been rapid infrastructure development in North Vietnam, Hanoi, probably more so than Ho Chi Minh's in the last 3 years, and a lot of that connectivity has been growth and development connecting Haiphong to Hanoi. So there's multiple freeways there, obviously reducing travel times. And we have seen a rapid growth in some of the provinces like Haiphong that have had a lot of large occupiers in manufacturing development move there. And now we're starting to see a logistics cluster form in Haiphong as forming part of that supply chain. So just a couple more points just on the logistics sector. We're seeing a lot of new occupiers and growth in the country. BW Industrial, obviously from the real estate side, and there's a lot of other real estate companies that have come to Vietnam in the last year, raising capital to build warehousing logistics platforms as well as ready-built factory platforms as well. So we really are seeing an evolution of that industrial logistics sector. I think in parallel to this industrial growth, we are seeing an e-commerce boom as well, where there's a huge amount of e-commerce transactions done a day. It's hard to specify the number, but it's around that 500,000 transactions on e-commerce per day. And obviously coming along with a lot of the e-commerce groups are now having very large real estate requirements, which is also another driving factor in the industrial market. I think a lot of we expect to see rapid growth in e-commerce over the next 5 years. And obviously, with it being a technology-savvy country with obviously very high online user volumes, it's which is demonstrated in this slide as well. Yep. So that's just a bit of a growth on the e-commerce, and yes, Bob. So that's our sort of overview of the industrial sector and these various stakeholding elements.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Stephen. And as I mentioned earlier, if you do have questions, then feel free to type those in. But let me ask you a few questions. Stephen. So, I mean, you had experience yourself in several markets across Asia Pacific. So, broadly, how would you assess, the current investment climate for logistics infrastructure in Vietnam compared to those markets?
Yeah, very good. So Bob, so I've obviously been in Asia for about 6.5 years. I've been with JLL for about 9. But I've worked obviously in Sydney, Australia, then Singapore, and now Vietnam for the last 4.5 years. The last 4.5 years working in investment in Vietnam, focusing on all sorts of investment classes, industrial being one of the main ones. We've certainly seen a big evolution in this sector, from infrastructure development, foreign capital coming to the market, and this has all been driven by occupier requirements and the growth in those requirements. So we really have seen strong growth in infrastructure, and that's obviously with the government trying to be progressive with roads and obviously networks, but also with regulation and infrastructure in some of these industrial parks and helping cluster growth in the areas that it's needed to support the manufacturing side.
Right, okay. You did touch on the US-China trade war and COVID. I mean, do you think those factors are playing into that growth, or is it really there's an evolution of this, and these are just minor aspects of that?
Yeah, I think obviously with the US trade war and COVID, I guess that there's a few aspects. I think the Vietnamese growth trajectory it still has a lot of it is very positive. I think there's been a lot of banks have come out and said that in 2021 they expect that GDP growth to be north of 8%. And I think when we look at this, it all comes down to that there is substantial middle class growth, which will be a strong trend in the next 5 years. And obviously domestic consumption is going to increase rapidly off the back of that. So I think I think Vietnam will continue on that strong growth. So obviously COVID will affect it, but there still will be strong growth. US-China trade war, I think in some ways will benefit Vietnam, but I guess it's a bit early days to see sort of how the results of that will conclude. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Because we do hear a lot about manufacturing displacement from China into Vietnam. So I was wondering, is that also playing into the logistics space from things that you're seeing? But I think it seems to be more of a long-term trend in terms of the expansion of the market. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I think, just I guess on that, there's been, we have seen, there are a lot of manufacturers coming to Vietnam. Obviously, there is the strong long-term growth, but also I think COVID has accelerated that for some of the manufacturers, certainly for some of them. There has been a few added benefits with that.
Right. Okay. And from your slides, there seems quite a discrepancy in warehouse space and investment between North Vietnam and South Vietnam. Do you see this continuing in terms of the different take-up?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's generally it depends on a few factors. We certainly think that there will be good rent growth throughout leasing for logistics tenants in the next 5 years. And that growth percentage ranges from probably 3% to 5%, depending on the area, the scarcity, and what where the occupiers need to be, and I guess supply shortfalls in those areas. But I think generally, given that the total warehousing market is about 3 million, and the total percentage of that being modern is only a fraction of that. It's probably somewhere between 25 and 30%. Then there is a discrepancy where locally built warehouses may rent for $2.50 to $3, whereas institutional quality warehouses may be $4 to $5. And even that price discrepancy can be seen in similar provinces or similar areas. So there are various factors like that leading to those discrepancies.
Right. Okay. We do have a couple of questions that have come in from our audience. Let me take this one. Are logistics warehouses mainly located in bonded areas or free trade zones? Are logistics warehouse mainly located in bonded areas or free trade zones? Are you able to take that?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of a combination, really. There obviously are a lot of bonded warehouses, in some of these key trading areas located near to ports and airports and other infrastructures like that for obviously import and export coverage. But then, given the different types of uses of the warehouses and for various overseas exports and domestic consumption, there are various clusters that aren't necessarily in specific bonded zones or free trade areas.
Okay, and we've got a question about cold chain infrastructure investment. I know from your chart that cold chain infrastructure is minimal. Are you seeing any initiatives to increase that capacity in Vietnam?
Yeah, I think at JLL, we've obviously done a lot of work with a lot of cold chain developers who have looked at the market, and especially a lot of the 3PLs, even some of the domestic 3PLs that have part of this in their portfolios. And we would say that, look, it's an early that there are multiple cold chain facilities in the country, but at the end of the day, it is an early. The market is early stage, and we certainly see that there will be growth in that sector in the next 6 to 12 months. Given there's quite a lot of increasing inquiry from cold chain occupiers, but the infrastructure and the zoning that the Vietnamese government has put in place, where with certain zones for service land and logistics. I think the platform set by the government is there to support these growth areas.
All right. Okay. So related to that, when you talk to your clients, how are their requirements evolving? How have they evolved in the last 3 to 5 years in terms of, say, the size of warehouses, the type, sophistication, number of loading docks, How have those requirements changed in the last couple of years, Stephen?
Yeah. So I think there's a few variations to the requirements. Obviously, firstly on the size, I think generally with a lot of international 3PLs, there could have within probably 18 months to 24 months ago, a lot of these requirements may have been between 5 to 20,000 square meters. That was probably the key range of requirement, and obviously having with sort of international specifications with height and clearance areas and these sorts of things. Now we are seeing requirements getting bigger. Between sort of 15,000 and even up to 50,000 for a lot of these groups. So we are seeing the requirements get bigger. In terms of the location, I think generally occupiers have been a bit more focused in certain areas, and now that land availability have reduced, and now we're seeing new clusters emerge and various other expansion activities like that. These occupiers have been a little bit more flexible on areas they can move in. An example of that is in Ho Chi Minh City, where occupiers have always been, we need to be in Binh Duong province to the north, and now we're seeing a lot of tenant movement to Long An and Dong Nai to the city's east as well. So I think the total number of inquiries is increasing as well. I think at the moment we see that there's probably over 1.2 million square meters of inquiries in the market, which is quite astonishing, really, because that's probably 35% of the total stock in the market. So developers at the moment really aren't developing this product, which is why we've seen a lot of new funds being initiated, to build international quality product. And a lot of these announcements have been made in the last sort of in 2020. So we are seeing expansion across obvious occupier requirements and the investment appetite as well.
Right. Okay. And as we see, the continuing involvement of the infrastructure, do you see any barriers to that in Vietnam? I mean, things like availability of finance, government regulations, lack of skills. Are there barriers to this expansion?
Yeah. So look, obviously this is a topic that we follow a lot, because obviously JLL being a real estate specialist, this is something that affects everything in real estate. Obviously, land price fluidity and new provinces that are opened up with new infrastructure. So it's something that we're close. There are challenges, obviously, that come from mainly regulation, a bit of a mismatch between investor regulation and government support. That there are challenges there. Although the government has been very successful in executing a number of infrastructure projects. The last 3 years have been very strong in North Vietnam, with a lot of new freeways and a lot of connectivity in North Vietnam. South Vietnam has lagged a little bit, but we are seeing some growth there. I think so. There are challenges with the regulation, also with land compensations, another big one. And when you're building some of these projects, it's not just you're dealing in various provinces. Even if it's in Greater Ho Chi Minh City, if infrastructure projects will span multiple provinces. For example, at the moment there's the Ben Look Highway which is a major road, which will be a big sort of factor for logistics. It goes across 3 different provinces. So you have 3 different government departments. You have compensation. So there's compensation is another factor that's a challenge as well.
Okay, I think it's this final question. It's about zoning policy. I mean, is zoning policy was needed to establish Vietnam structures, but is that policy now creating more constraints in efficiencies moving forward? Question about zoning policy.
Yeah. So I think in emerging markets, obviously like Vietnam, zoning can be a challenge. The positive thing in Vietnam is that the zoning for industrial parks is very advanced. So the government will the regulation changed about 5-6 years ago, when now you cannot build industrial logistics assets outside an industrial park, and there is a very clear regulation and zoning around how industrial parks can be developed. And they've created these industrial zonal authorities, which obviously are involved with the zoning as well as issuing the licenses for occupiers. So having said that, we have quite strong visibility over the future supply of land for industrial, because the government approves these industrial zones, which can range in size from 300 to 700 hectares. Usually they're around 400 to 500 hectares. So we know where the zones are going to be. And obviously with the zone, they have a percentage allocation for logistics, for manufacturers, and there can be rezonings that can happen if the change is warranted. So Vietnam is quite good in that aspect, and it's one of the advantages that it has.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Stephen. I see that our 30 minutes is already up, so I will need to bring this session to a close. And I really want to thank Stephen Higgins from JLL for his insights today on logistics in Vietnam, and especially what's happening in terms of infrastructure investment and development, which seems to be pretty healthy. So I'm sure we'll all keep an eye on that, how that evolves over the next 5 to 10 years. And so Stephen, thanks again. Thank you very much for that. And it's my duty to move on to hand over to the next session. Thank you.